All right. So today we're talking about books.
Books and reading, the importance of reading. But before we get into that, what are you currently reading?
So me and you have talked a little bit about it. I'm reading The Republic by Plato right now.
Okay.
I'm trying to get into a lot of the old masters.
Mm-hmm.
I've read a lot of more contemporary things. I'm trying to understand these like foundational Western philosophies and like where like how a lot of things nowadays come from these ancient texts.
Gotcha. How is Plato going?
It's been very enlightening. I've learned a lot about how we view society and how interactions of people. Back then was really the foundation of the idea of republics or of like democracies or of larger states than a small community. This was kind of, I guess, what he was getting at.
At the very least, it was the formalization of this thing. Right?
Exactly, and like the understanding, he tries to define justice and what justice means, what injustice means, and he kind of defines this social class where their career is the field of justice, which obviously nowadays is kind of split into a lot of different things. For Plato, it was his idea of the watchdog or the guardian. He has a couple names he uses for them. Basically, like the ruling but kind of military class.
Yeah, I was gonna say because it's kind of split between like
he starts
like
it as
philosopher king and then also but like the standing army, you know.
Exactly, and he says that they're basically the same thing. Like a military man has to be a philosopher. It has to be more of a politician. Any military man, like he talks about generals in that way. And like,
well, I mean, if you look at like the history of, most governments have had that kind of backing where
exactly
like, the prominent and successful members of the government have had some background in like Caesar is like a prime example.
Exactly,
you know?
and a lot of the most I guess influential or the leaders that people are more willing to follow is one who would actually fight for them and actually has fought for them.
Yeah.
And Plato kind of arrives at the conclusion that just military man should be kind of like positioned in a way to be the leader, like by this conversational, Socratic method that he uses. But
that's one of the things that always that I appreciate most about Socrates is just the Socratic method itself, rather than any of the conclusions that he draws from his particular use of the Socratic method. Just the idea of asking questions in order to, like, if you're having a debate with someone, getting the person you're debating with to admit that they're wrong through the questioning of their premises.
Have them prove themselves wrong
exactly.
instead of you. Because really, with the Socratic method, if someone is wrong, they will be proven wrong through the Socratic method. Like that's the beauty of it. And I like that because within the Republic, especially the first section, is more back and forth. It's with Socrates, Thrasymachus, Glaucon. There's a couple guys that are all speaking, and this idea of justice and injustice goes back and forth. And actually, it's like Socrates himself in that section, like, reaches a couple dead ends.
Exactly.
And says
through the other people's arguments.
And then he's like, well, now we need to turn around and work back and then go a different direction, which is beautiful because you read a lot of like works and the author is like, I know what I'm talking about and I'm just going to tell you what I know.
Or even like modern political debate, I feel like is heavily lacking in the application of the Socratic method, where you basically have two alternate visions presenting their vision, but not in a dialogue with each other. Rather,
exactly.
They're just kind of. It's almost like there's a brick wall in between them.
There's no
they're
synthesis.
Just speaking to the audience rather than to each other.
Exactly, and I feel like it kind of resembles in a way like American politics. In that way, you know, it's like the idea was to have this discussion between two people that disagree, and through that discussion for them to find something outside of themselves. Because like Socrates' whole idea was that knowledge is intrinsic. Like the knowledge of the universe is already inside of you. Like I remember reading, there was one where he was teaching a kid the Pythagorean theorem, like trigonometry basically, and he just asked this child questions, and eventually the child was able to tell him, like, if you had, he was dealing with squares and he was trying to tell like what the area was.
Yeah, and he's trying, his idea is that like a child
already knows,
born with the knowledge. You have to be reminded of it.
You have to be reminded of it, and that's beautiful because
so the copy of, just, I'm sorry sorry to cut you off.
No, you're fine.
The copy of the Republic that you have does have, because that's not in the Republic itself. That's one of the.
This is something I read separately.
Oh, okay.
This is another story. About. I think it's also written by. I think it was also.
It was Plato. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's one of the other dialogues. It's just
but
in Republic.
And that one was beautiful because like that's his idea is that like truth itself, and that's something we've lost, is that truth itself is outside of you. Like a lot of people, I think, especially in the modern era, especially with this like whole postmodern thing, it's like defining your own truth. And Socrates was saying that like if what you're trying to gain is truth and true knowledge, it's intrinsic because truth is just there outside of you.
Yeah.
When you have to create something that isn't just logically certain and you can't find just by the Socratic method, it's not a truth because it doesn't permeate everything.
Yeah, truth isn't something that you
create.
It's something that's disclosed to you. Like
exactly.
you can be in a state of ignorance regarding it, but that doesn't make it not present.
Exactly.
And then it's not that you create your own truth, it's that the truth is revealed to you in some way. Like the boy with the triangles and shit.
And it's a beautiful way, and I think that a lot of our education system nowadays has kind of drifted away from that, where it's more just telling you things. Like instead of asking the child and pulling this intrinsic knowledge out of them, nowadays we just say, hey, this is how you determine the length of the hypotenuse of this triangle. This is how you do this, and it doesn't, and like we know, I mean, it doesn't really work.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to do trial and error is the way to do it, and that's the Socratic method. Is literally just it's two-person trial and error.
Yeah, where one person knows, but he's allowing the other person
guide
to disclose.
Instead of
to find that information for himself.
Exactly. That's why I hate the word of a professor, because they're just professing knowledge to you.
Yeah.
But they should be a guide. They should guide you on your way to understand things that are just intrinsically true.
Exactly, because someone can tell you something a million times. It's like it's like growing up as a kid, as a teenager. It's like your parents
tell you
they tell you this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do, but you usually don't listen to them until something happens.
Don't text and drive, and then you crash your car, and that's when you learn.
Yeah, then that's why they were telling me not to do that.
Yeah, but then you actually understand.
Yes.
There's a difference between knowing and understanding.
Yeah.
And and even Plato even talks about that. There's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. He talks about that with his guardian. He said there is. I think that's one of the first places where in a lot of literature where the idea of mental knowledge and spiritual wisdom are separated as two different things. And because he talks about that in his education, and he talks about it first in education for the guardians, but for a society, that those are two separate parts. And obviously back then they had the poems, they had the Iliad and the Odyssey, and they had other poems that they were kind of their theological, spiritual wisdom that they learned from.
Yeah.
Which, as we talked about earlier, Plato even critiqued a lot of those.
Oh yeah.
But he saw that as an important thing, and there is truth to be found in everything. And he saw with the physical pursuits, there was truth to be found in that, in everything, music, And he said you're not creating it; it's just to find and. It's a beautiful idea.
Just a path towards truth.
In every direction.
Yeah.
And it's almost like...
Because if you think about it, like you said, truth being ever present, truth being something that exists outside of your own consciousness, anywhere you go, anything that you do has some potential to disclose truth to you.
That's the what is it? The kingdom of God is within and everything around you. God is in everything, quite literally. Everything is a lesson that you can learn. Musashi Yasumoto, I love him. I know we've talked about him before.
He's the sword guy, right?
The sword guy, dude. Yeah. I love him. But he basically said the same thing. It's truth is self-evident everywhere. You know, if you look deep enough into anything, you will find the truth.
Yeah.
Which is what a lot of theologians. If you look deep enough in anything, you find God.
Exactly.
Stephen Hawking said, "What the first sip of science creates an atheist, and at the bottom of the well you find God."
Exactly. Yeah.
But anyways, what have you been reading?
See, now I feel self-conscious because I have not been delving into the great works of Western civilization.
It's okay, we need the duality.
Yeah. So I just finished a book by Mikhail Bulgakov.
Okay.
It's a novel. It's called The White Guard. It's a novel about the Russian Civil War. It takes place in 1918, from the perspective of a family of Tsarist sympathizers. It takes place in Ukraine too, which is that's one of the things.
What
that
era
drew me
is this?
To.
This is
It's a post-revolution, so the year immediately following the Bolshevik Revolution.
Because the Bolshevik Revolution, and forgive me for being ignorant on this, but it was during World War One that this happened, correct?
It was.
Or World War Two?
It's largely by most like scholars worth their salt. It's credited as the thing that ended World War One.
Because a lot of people, I was reading about this, and apparently the Germans were trying to get Lenin back into Russia. Like they were trying to deport him back to Russia because they knew if Lenin went back and was allowed back, it was likely that a revolution would actually be started. Yeah. And they thought it would destabilize the Russian Empire and like not allow.
Ironically, though, it did the opposite.
Yeah.
You know, well, I mean, there was definitely a long period
it revitalized,
of destabilization,
yeah,
but in the long term, for German interest,
down the line,
the Russian Revolution was not very good.
30 years later, it'd be their downfall.
Mm-hmm.
But so tell me about this guy.
Well, Bulgakov is he's one of my favorite authors. He was born in Ukraine. He moved to Moscow after the revolution, and a lot of his books were heavily censored by the Soviet government. But the particular book that I'm reading, it was originally a play, so it was originally like meant to be performed, but then afterwards he kind of fleshed it out and made it into a full novel. And the play was the original like inspiration for this book was one of Joseph Stalin's favorite plays. And a lot of people credit that play for like the reason why Bulgakov was even allowed to write in the Soviet Union, because Stalin loved it. Which is it's very odd when you think about it historic, because I mean it's about czarists. It's about people who you know, they hated the Bolsheviks, they hated, you know, the Ukrainian nationalists, even though they were based out of Ukraine. They wanted a return of the Holy Russian Empire. This family is like, you know, in one of the very opening chapters, it's going over like this you know, this 17-year-old in this family has written a bunch of graffiti on their like family stove, and one of them is like a big, you know, it's a portrait of Tsar Nicholas, and it says "Long live the Tsar," and he ends up later in the book, after a group of Ukrainian nationalists take over the city that they're in, he ends up having to erase it out of fear of being, you know, kicked out, because that's another dichotomy people don't like. The Russian Civil War had a lot of different factions going on. You know, like I said, these were Ukrainians,
because there's probably still other oligarchs in place that would have like,
yeah, these are Ukrainians, right? And in modern context, you know, we've kind of developed this understanding that Ukraine is separate from Russia, but these are Ukrainians that want a return of the Russian Empire. They identify as Russians. They identify as subjects to the Tsar. So
Tsar Nicholas was the last Tsar, correct?
Yes. Yeah. He's the one that ends up getting murked.
Oh, and he's the one with Rasputin.
Yes, his wife
was sleeping with Rasputin. He might have been sleeping with Rasputin.
Allegedly.
Rasputin was sleeping with everyone.
Yeah. But yeah, it's very interesting to see, especially a book about a conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
Well, you don't see that pro-Tsar sympathy a lot.
Exactly, and that's another thing that's interesting about it is gradually, you know, there's a line later on in the book where, you know, like the pro-Ukrainian nationalist forces end up deserting this city that our main characters live in, and one of the guys is like, God, those damn officers, almost makes you want to turn into a Bolshevik. And you see this kind of gradual shift where, like, you know, the town gets taken over by these Ukrainian nationalists and everything's kind of fucking shitty. And then, you know, there's one of the things I love about Bulgakov is he writes in a very, like, it's historical fiction, obviously, even though if you look at his biography, like if you look at his life and then you read the book The White Guard, you're like, oh, this is about him. This is about his life. Because, you know, the main character in The White Guard is a you know, he's an old army doctor, and Bulgakov was an old army doctor, and, you know, they fought for the Russians in World War I, and you know, there's very clear parallels there, but there's an element of like the fantastical in all of his books where, you know, religion, you know, cannot help but permeate through this very like cold material reality. Like the opening of The White Guard starts with our main character's mother has just died, and there's a service, and one of our main characters, the younger Turbin, is talking to one of the Orthodox priests that's done the service right after it ends. And there's references to the Book of Revelation because Russian Civil War is a very apocalyptic feeling in the air.
I can imagine.
And then at the end, you have this
World War I is going on. Like,
yeah. Well, it's just kind of
ending.
come to a close, and at the end, you have this kind of like I think it's a very progressive understanding, because I feel like there's a hardliner interpretation of like the apocalypse and Revelation, where it's like the world will literally explode and every good person will go to heaven, and it's just this very like clear cut, this is one event that will happen in the future and we don't know what.
Or is this a theme that plays out?
Or is it a theme that plays out throughout history? And that's kind of the instinct that you get later on in the book, because these Ukrainian nationalists take over and they fuck shit up in this city. And then one of the last scenes is like a distant train that's full of Bolsheviks, and it's just kind of it's juxtaposed with reminders of that kind of apocalyptic feeling and this impending doom that also results in like the revelation of the Bible. It's terrifying.
But it's also purifying.
But it purifies. It rejuvenates
necessary evil, or not evil, but necessary destruction and chaos.
And then alongside that, that's the White Guard that I just finished reading it. It's good. I recommend it. He has another book called The Master and Margarita that I probably recommend that one more. That's his like famous one, but White Guard's good. And then along with that, I've been reading a Grover Furr book about how Stalin didn't do anything wrong, and that's also been good. But
I'm gonna have to give that one a look.
It's very long.
Really?
It is incredibly long and incredibly thorough, but it's worth it. It's worth a read. That's it for me. I kind of gravitate towards, at least for recently, I've been trying to like finish books more. But
and also I think that a lot of the things you're reading are very prevalent with what's happening in the world nowadays.
Yeah.
It's important to understand the Eastern Bloc as Americans, especially, it's going to, like, what happens there is inevitably going to affect us somehow.
Yeah.
And what it always has, and probably always will affect the world, what happens in that area,
Yeah.
It's just a very rich land, and it's fertile. The crux of humanity, of the Western civilization, was a couple hundred miles from the Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot to, and I think that I like that we're both reading different things. I think it brings a weird, because the old philosophers, those old Greek and Roman philosophers,
mm-hmm.
It was very it's almost more like metaphysical and or just very materialistic, like what is actionable,
Yeah, like
whereas this is like,
contrasting like Aristotle with like Marcus Aurelius or something.
Exactly.
Where it's like Aristotle is getting into these deep, like what is truth?
Like the idea of
what
being.
Is a thing?
Like we don't talk about being anymore.
And Marcus Aurelius is just like,
how do you be a good person?
Yeah, how do you be
in this world, in this
person,
real place? And like a lot of modern writing is more like, it's more in depth. Like you said, you've got like the religious aspect, you've got the historical aspect. It's also got like a narrative aspect.
Yeah.
Which is more in depth. I look at these things almost as like stone. They're just like, they're very, when you get to the bottom of them, they're very just rudimentary, because they are just based in these, that's why they've lasted so long. They're just these natural truths that these guys found out and happened to write down.
Yeah.
But I like the dichotomy, and we can find like similarities between people that wrote things thousands of years apart.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes to, to solidify your, or I guess it would be Socrates' thesis that truth is I know. It's like, well, that's the thing. If you learn it, though, to someone who hasn't read Socrates, it is your thesis.
Yeah.
But the idea that truth is external, that truth is, so no matter where you are in time or in place, there's the same truth is accessible to you.
Setting up this idea that will basically be the foundation of monotheistic religions too.
Exactly.
Is that like God is, and like that's like, we even get it to where like the Protestants are rediscovering that, where like you don't need an institution to find God. You don't need even the Bible to find God.
Mm-hmm.
God is just there and ever present, and if you look for him, you will find him. and it's a beautiful idea.
Absolutely.
They knew. Yeah. I believe that. I mean, Plato was a monotheist, I believe.
Yeah, there is definitely stuff, especially in the. I don't know if you've gotten to the very latter parts of the Republic
where he talks about art and like.
Yeah, there's definitely a case to be made there.
I think so. I think
especially with his criticisms of the Iliad and the Odyssey.
I think if you would have asked them, they would have called it something like truth or something, you know, or like they would have called it truth or purpose or something.
Maybe even logos.
Logos.
Yeah.
The word.
Which
is used a lot in the Bible as well. But on that note, I think that's a good what are we reading?
Okay. Now we're gonna be talking about reading in the abstract.
Reading in the abstract.
So how do you this is something that always interests me. How do you read? Like I'm talking tell me like when do you read? Do you limit yourself to reading one text at a time? Like what just how do you
I prefer to read multiple texts.
Okay.
Right now I'm rereading the Bible and I'm reading the Republic. I've also started on the Federalist Papers. I'm kind of just I'm studying the Constitution a little bit.
Very dry.
Very dry. It's hard.
Yeah.
And the Republic is
much more moist.
It's much more moist. But it takes a lot out of you. Obviously reading the Bible can take a lot out of you. It's just very dense and you need to stop. And a lot of these texts you can't just sit down and read half of the Republic in one sitting.
Yeah.
Like I could, but I wouldn't.
You wouldn't get anything.
I wouldn't get it. I reread over and over. So I'll sit on a book of the Bible. Like I took for the Gospels, it probably took me 2 weeks, which I could have read them in a day.
Yeah.
But 2 weeks of like I'll read like a section, and then just put it down and just think and just like look around. And that's my thing, especially with the Bible. I feel like when I'm reading that, like if I'm present, like God will speak to me in that way. And I do the same thing with Plato. Like I'll read a page or two, or I'll read he'll have trains of thoughts, and then he's like, well, we hit this dead end, like those dead ends I was talking about. I'll stop there.
Yeah.
And I'll think about why is this not, and I try to wrap my head around it. And so then when I look back, especially with Plato, which is I love like this whole Socratic method, and I know I keep talking about it, but it really does lead you down a natural, like linguistic and like human path. So like when I look back, I can see all the faults too, which makes my understanding of the actual true path that we end up taking at the end more apparent, because I can see all these other spots that I could have went down.
It also shows you like when you're listening to a line of argumentation from, you know, whatever source, you can hear like jumps in logic. You can hear things that, you know, you can spot the weak points in the armor of a person's argument. And
that's and you can't really, I feel like, understand your own beliefs if you haven't tried to defeat them. Like,
exactly.
I mean, that's that Nietzschean idea.
Yeah.
It's like if you really believe something, try to destroy it. You know, and take the other side. And I think that's where we've lost a lot of that today. I know I think we spoke in the last episode on the classical education, which is something I'm very big on. And I told you my goal now, I'm trying to read all the great works of the Western canon, because I feel like that was part of the classical education. You would read the great works.
Yeah. You
would learn Hebrew. You would learn an art. You would learn penmanship. You would do physical education, these things. But I think that reading these great works, you're not learning anything by modern standards.
Yeah.
You're learning how to learn. Like that was the idea of what philosophy was to them. Like to them, philosophy wasn't some dude in a library just talking about like they think, like a lot of people think of like Hegel when they think of philosophy. Like philosophy is the love of learning and the pursuit of understanding.
That's one of the things about Hegel that always
he's just too pretentious.
He's literally, the foundation of his philosophy is that he figured everything out.
Yeah, and I'm just like you no.
So he's almost an anti-philosopher. He's almost and that's a case that Marx would actually make, is that Hegel was the end of philosophy.
Really?
Yeah.
When I think that like he kind of ended the metaphysical, like the thought, like thinking of like what is being, what is this, like what is, you know, and I think that's my goal with my reading now, because there was a long time where I read nonfiction. Like I'm a science guy. I read a lot of like chemistry and physics and like, I don't know, social sciences.
Yeah.
But I think like me reading a sociology book versus me reading all of these great works, like I'll understand humanity. I already have understood humanity way better just from seeing how people have thought and these commonalities between us all.
You also get the perspective of like, you know, if you isolate your reading to modern contemporary works, then you tend to excuse me, you tend to get caught up in like a perspective
You
that,
become a liberal.
yes, you do become a liberal. But you have a tendency to think that like, oh, you know, people thought differently like back then, and then there are different eras of people thinking differently, and that, I mean, there's a case to be made for like the development of thought, but when you go back and read like Plato, for instance, you know, it just goes to like solidify the understanding that humans have always been the way that they are, you know.
Exactly. Like I think we have this idea of ancient people as being just so much more dumb than us, and it's like no,
Mhm.
they hadn't had as long to develop things. But if you were to bring like Socrates here, obviously he'd be very confused at the things around him.
But give him a week and he'd be like, I
We
mean,
could just sit down and have a conversation if
yeah.
we spoke the same language, and it wouldn't be like I'm talking to a lesser person. Like he still had the same bandwidth, the same processing power
Mhm.
in his brain that we have.
Yeah.
If not, probably
If not
more.
more.
Probably more.
Yeah.
And to just discount that, because I hate this notion that we hear a lot. Well, why would I listen to what some guy 1,000 years ago said? They didn't know anything, and it's like they built basically your entire everything. Like
It's
all
like,
of this around us came from predecessors.
It's like why have their works existed for thousands of years if there's nothing relevant about them, if there's nothing of merit there, then why have they been preserved for this long?
Why was all of Western society built on them?
Exactly.
That's my contention with a lot of a lot of atheists. I'm like, even if you choose to not believe in God, that's on you. But you can't ignore the fact that the three great texts are like the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Quran have shaped Western society.
Yeah.
Like, and just to ignore something that prominent and just think that like, oh, I'm gonna gain nothing from reading this book, even if you don't believe in it. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's like at the very least, I'm a firm believer in this. Even if you disagree with the contents of a text, like even if you are thoroughly unconvinced, even if you get through the entire text and you do at the end, you think, damn, I didn't learn anything from that. That was totally pointless. It's not true. You learned how something is wrong.
yeah,
You know
why something could be wrong.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I'm adamant about. But like my whole life, I've been adamant about is if you disagree with something, let's say you're like a
Chase that.
yeah, you're let's say you're a Republican and you want to talk about like cultural Marxism. Why go pick up Marx?
Yeah.
And read him, and then explain to me how he's wrong. Because if you can't do that, then you're standing on thin air. Your argument is based on nothing. It's the same for leftists. If you hate Nazis so much, I mean, go pick up Mein Kampf and read it.
And then understand why you should hate Nazis.
Exactly.
Not even to mention the leftists that espouse Marx and haven't even read any Marx or Engels.
That's literally all of them.
Okay, I mean, I'm like, how am I supposed to debate you when I've read your book? I haven't read it all the way, but I'm like, if I know more about your book than you do, and you're trying to argue that it's right to me, like, like you can't.
Every time I read Marx, I have to stop after like 20 pages and just like think aloud to myself. How do so many like how do you call yourself a Marxist?
And they misinterpret it.
And
so much.
it's not even misinterpretation. He'll say in plain German, not English, but he'll say in plain English the exact opposite
of
that
what they
the
espouse.
majority of modern leftists say. The exact opposite. And it's appalling to me.
And that's where I get back to, like, people now, they think of gaining knowledge as like walking into a candy shop and just saying like, I want to buy one of those and I want to get one of those. Like, I'm just gonna acquire these bits of knowledge and then I'll be smart.
It's pop. It's like pop knowledge.
Exactly. It's a Corvette with no engine inside of it. You know what I mean? It looks nice, but if I can break down your argument, and that's why I can talk to someone, a lot of these people nowadays, that I agree with everything they're saying, and I could still destroy their argument because they don't understand their own argument enough to defend it. And it's like I can say things that I don't even agree with to you and still defeat your argument with arguments that are not my own.
I can back up arguments that I don't agree with
better than you can back up the arguments I agree with.
Like better than you can back up arguments that you agree with. Like,
and that's a sad reality. And like that's where I think a lot of these like postmodernists have kind of led us. And I always vilify postmodernists. They annoy, deconstructivists annoy the crap out of me, just because I'm just like, you can't your ideas can't be no ideas. Like that's just it's just so contradictory. But like that there's no way to argue with someone that doesn't think there's any value in like understanding. Like they're like they say there is no understanding, and like there is no like, and you can create it. It's back to the Socratic thing. You can create this truth, and so therefore like they destroyed every argument. They've deconstructed every argument, including their own, and like it's and
that's the thing about postmodernism that always kind of like struck me as an irony. It's like, you know, your whole thing is like there are no meta narratives. There are like, you know, everything is just kind of chaos, and it can all be, you know, dissolved into air. That's a meta narrative. That's you're explaining how the world is. You're creating an overarching narrative that provides explanation to the world. So, and then it leads to where you get where there is no truth at all. Even the truth that there is no truth is not a truth, which leads back around to, you see,
postmodernism is just the idea of just continuous of these like circular definitions of things where like you can't grasp anything.
But then I think what we're seeing now in modernity is a rediscovery of concrete truth, wherein the duration of this kind of postmodern era has led to that logic I just laid out, where it's like
people want to clutch on the stone again.
The truth that there is no truth can't be a truth. So then there is truth. It's like a weird circle.
And we see it in everything. We see it in children nowadays and in young adults. People are confused about everything, and they don't understand anything. Like, you ask people about things, and they don't even want to understand. Now, they're like you said, and I think in the last 5 to 10 years, especially in America, there has been a revitalization of these old works and of these old understandings. I've heard of a lot more people like reading, like obviously theological texts, but like older philosophical texts that are like the basis of everything we've built this society on. And so if you can stand on that, at least like you have an understanding of like, what am I, what can I do, like what is the world? And like you can't, if you don't have an understanding of the things around you in any way, that you like you can't be anything. Like it just makes life almost pointless.
And that's where you see the transition from, like, with these leftists and these postmodernists. You see them, it's happening gradually, but they're turning away from like the kind of like raw like postmodern atheism back onto some kind of like negative spiritualism.
It is, and it's almost, they're almost just as religious as a Christian zealot, you know?
Well, you see even, you know, this will immediately get shot down as like, oh, that's just people being edgy. But you see like a revival of Satanism. You see a revival of paganism.
And not the original one where it was atheism and they just called it Satanism. No, this is an actual worship of these hedonistic values.
Of the
like,
self. Yeah.
A worship of the self. And like it's creating, and it's idolatry. I mean, it is a worship. It is a practice. It is, and they have tradition, and they have, like, they create these ideas.
And even absent like overt Satanism, you have like AOC the other day, you know, she someone who like definitely a leftist, definitely. I've yet to hear, this is the first time I've ever heard her even reference like the spiritual, was the other day. But she, you know, she, like most leftists, like most postmodernists, even she has gotten to a point where she has to acknowledge some kind of external truth to justify her beliefs. She, you know, but it's just that her God thinks that, you know, cutting people's genitals off is moral and good.
That's something I say to postmodernists all the time. I try to say, like, you can't have a right or wrong without, you have to believe in something, in abstraction. And that's what reading does for you, is it allows you to, like, with back to the Republic, just because I'm currently in that, but what Plato is doing is creating this abstraction, this conversation that is an abstraction. And from that conversation, Socrates and the people he's talking to, namely like Glaucon, they're creating an abstraction that you can visualize. And you have to have these abstractions outside of you. That's the spiritual. And that's why these postmodernists, they're creating abstractions, but they're not founded on anything. But that's religion. Like, that's like understanding there is something outside of this physical realm, is like, that's a spirituality component.
Yeah.
And like that's why I think that because they haven't read these things, like they can't properly create, because abstractions are still rooted in reality. Yeah. And reality comes from these abstractions.
You're intaking like
the duality.
Like you're intaking like the external world and creating an understanding of it in your consciousness.
Yeah, and they mirror each other. I mean, Plato even said there was the world of ideals, you know?
Yeah.
Like, and that's the idea, is like there's this abstract world, and then there's the physical realm, which is imperfect. But you have to, it has to be rooted in this. You can't just create an abstraction outside. Like, I can't just, I can't even come up with anything in my brain right now, because I mean, I'm like, it's just.
What if trees were gay?
What if trees were gay? That's an abstraction, because there's no physical rooting in it. It's like if I say I have two souls inside of me. Like, that's a new thing people will say. It's like, how
the whole what is it? It used to be called Otherkin when it was like exclusive to weird internet communities.
But it's like it's creating these abstractions that they want us to abide by, and it's like, I can understand abstractions. Like, I believe in God, and I can't inherently like hold God in my hand, but I can still. It's rooted in reality. Like, we can feel, and we know that there has to be, and like these things are these evident truths that you can find. I can't find the fact that you want to be a woman or something.
Exactly.
Like there's no.
And that's another thing with the transgender stuff, is like, the whole premise is that your consciousness, your soul, is not.
They never want to say that.
Yeah, they don't want to say that, but your soul is in the wrong body,
and your soul is separate from the body in this abstract plane.
So surely there is a metaphor, and that's why it has to inevitably lead to some kind of inverted spiritualism, whether it be like.
And I think that's where they get caught up.
Yeah,
because they're almost basically linguistically proving there's spirituality and there's God.
Yes.
But they don't want to admit that.
Yes,
you can't be a materialistic and say that there is no God and we're atheists and this is this, but also I have a soul, and my soul lives on and is different from me, and my soul is in the wrong body. And if my soul had just been put in the right, like, you're justifying my thing, but you're doing it like wrong. You've got it upside down,
Yeah, that's why I say, like, a negative spiritual. It's Satanism, and that sounds extreme. I'm not even like a religious zealot, but it is. I mean, that's just what it is.
Well, and it's like we've taught kids nowadays. I mean, me and you had the discussion about the Big Bang. Like, we teach kids knowledge. We teach them things.
Yes.
And we don't teach them what holds it all together, which is, I mean, God, the universe, whatever people want to call it. But like in a science class, like, we teach kids that there was the Big Bang and the universe is here, but they don't understand that there is that other component to like everything. Like, even math, like, it's all tied in together, and it's the language of the universe.
You're not taught, like, you're taught facts, not logic. Like, you're taught, this happened, this is.
That's why
this
but so annoying to argue with people that have no understanding of logic. Like, there's so many people nowadays where have you ever done this, where you provide a logical argument, and you take that logical argument and you apply it to something else, and it still stands up, and they're like, well, wait, you can't do that. It's like, no, that's the point of logic.
Yeah.
Is it just works.
Yes.
If your logic is correct, it works everywhere. It works in every situation, because it's logic, and logic is outside of yourself and is true. And you don't teach people that. It's, oh my God, that's the most annoying people to argue with.
Absolutely. So do you remember, like, any significant book that you read in your English class?
I remember, not in English classes. I did take a U.S. history class where I read a lot of interesting, more historical accounts.
Yeah.
I remember, I read Howard Zinn.
Okay.
That was
not the least terrible. Not the most terrible.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it depends on who you ask.
Yeah.
But that's probably the only, like, deep work I read. What's the short story about in the future they start eating poor babies because it's like, how do we?
A Modest Proposal.
A Modest Proposal. I loved that.
That one was fun. I remember reading that one too. That one was actually good
because we had a debate.
Yeah.
I had to debate the side that we should be eating babies, and my team won.
Irish babies.
Irish babies. Yeah, because they were starving, right?
Yes.
And it was like, well, we solved the starving problem
by eating babies.
And the babies don't starve because we're eating them.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Less people to feed. Everybody gets to eat.
A Modest Proposal.
It's that. What's that quote people say? Everybody eats. You know what I mean? What they meant to say is babies, but the end of the word got cut off.
It was censored. The truth was censored.
But no, I never remember reading anything substantial in school. Most of what I read outside of school, like around then, I read the Bible early high school. I read Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I read a lot of Nietzsche. I started reading some Hegel.
The teenage Nietzsche phase.
every young man should have a Nietzsche phase.
It builds character.
It does, and you can look back and be like, oh Lord.
My father-in-law was telling me that apparently late in his life, in like protest of like the growing German nationalism of of Nietzsche's era, he started telling people that he was descended of Polish nobility, and it was just a lie. But he was like adamant about it. He was like, "Yeah, I'm a Polish king."
Nietzsche's like that guy in your friend group where you're like, you got to warn everyone before he comes over. It's
yeah,
like, he's a good guy, I promise.
Just don't get him started on like anything.
When I tell people to read Nietzsche, I'm like, just finish it. Don't think too much about it while you're reading it, and it's worth a read. And I love reading Nietzsche.
Zarathustra was right about women.
I can't even remember. It's been so long since I read those books. I gave it to someone to borrow, and they never gave it back to me.
As happens with that book specifically. I think I've owned like 5 copies.
Yes, well, because it's like $5 for a copy. Yeah. It's such a short book,
and you can find it anywhere,
literally. But so I guess to circle back, how do you read, Sal? Do you read?
No, I don't read.
That is based.
I digest. I just
by osmosis.
Yeah. Well, no. You see, what I do actually is I'll read a page and then I'll tear it out and I'll eat it, because then you're really taking it in.
All of it, literally.
No,
the ink gets you a little.
Yeah. That's the most important part, especially with those older books with like lead ink.
Good ink.
No, it's mwah. Mwah. No, okay, but I have like a 3-book system.
At a time?
It's sometimes, yes, at a time. And it sometimes works, but then if you choose books that are of radically different lengths, as I've just realized, it doesn't work as well. But
do you try to have them on similar subjects?
No, that's the brilliance of the 3-book system. Okay, you have 3 books that might be tangentially related, but the style of book is what distinguishes them.
Okay.
So what I usually do is I have like a nonfiction book, a fiction book, like a historical, like nonfiction, like hard facts book, a fiction book, and some kind of usually religious, but occasionally like other types of like a theoretical book where like philosophy, political philosophy,
more abstract.
Something that's not necessarily dealing with particular historical events, but the conception of reality,
ideas.
Yeah. So, and then I fluctuate between like either like my most recent one I finished was The White Guard, and I just kind of ate through that one. But I fluctuate. I do it so I don't get bored with books.
I agree. If I read one book continuously, I'll find myself just getting burnt out on that book.
And it also, for me, like I have a lot of books in my house. So for me, it's like, if I'm just trying to, like, if I'm reading one book and I get bored of it and I move to a different book, and then the same thing happens where I read it for a while and I get bored with it and I go to a different book, it's better for me to have 3 books that I rotate through, where it's like, if I'm bored with this one, I go to the other one, and then eventually I'll come back to the one I was, rather than just
revitalized in your interest.
Yeah, rather than reading like 40 pages of one book, moving on to 40 pages of another book, and then just until you're like, what was I even reading like a month ago? Like,
I also think it helps to not get so indoctrinated into one style of thought. Like,
yes.
Especially, like, for example, Nietzsche. If I was just reading Nietzsche, it's easy to just develop that Nietzschean view of everything.
Which is not a good one.
No. Like, I mean, I would read Nietzsche with something a little bit less dark and
a
dramatic.
little bit more positive.
I might read some actual nonfiction or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's another good thing, is to have your books complement each other, but in a way, like like it's like cooking, where it's like you want to have like some sweet here and some savory here. You don't want everything to be savory. You don't want it to overbalance it with one thing, like and just in general, like you said, like reading, like not getting caught up in one form of thought, because let's say
that's a rabbit hole a lot of people go down.
Yes.
And they only want to read that kind of thought.
Yes, absolutely. And but it limits your worldview, because if you think about, like, I'm very well versed in like Marxism, so that's like, and that's one of the things that I feel like people get caught up into, is like, well, I need to read, if it's not explicitly Marxist, I can't. I'm not going to read it. Like
and therefore you are the worst Marxist, because you don't understand.
Yes, exactly. And someone like Marx, you know, he's not just reading. Obviously, he's not reading Marxism because he's creating it, but you know, he's not just reading like 18th century socialist writings. He is reading those, but he's also, you know, familiarizing himself with Hegel. You know, he's
you need the contrast.
Yes, he's reading a wide variety of things, and then synthesizing and refining what he's reading into something more cohesive. And that's how every thinker is. Like,
you're a great thinker.
Every good thinker. Like, you can't even to go back to like Plato. It's like there was a lot less for him to read, but you still hear him, like he is well versed in like the Iliad and the Odyssey and the oral traditions of his time and place. You know,
even if you get to the idea of Socrates, I mean, Socrates in a lot of these books has already decided, he already knows what he believes.
Yeah,
a lot of times, but the whole point of it is he wants to find people who have disagreements with him and have different kinds of thought.
Yes,
because that's the whole method, is that you cannot grow in a bubble, in a vacuum. You know, you have to be exposed to other ideas. It's the only way.
It's what hardens you. It's what makes you capable of expressing yourself.
Turns you from iron to steel. You know, it's through the flames. You know, that's the only way. And also, it's hard to see. It's like a lot of kids growing up in America nowadays. They have this idea that like America is a horrible place to live, and it's like you've never seen anything else.
And there's almost a discount, like, you know, for a very, I mean, it's still a popular like genre of historical writing now, is like I don't want to say, but that's what it is now. It's like America apologia, where like it's trying to redeem some aspect of American history. You know, it wouldn't have been apologia 50 years ago. It would have just been history. But now it's, you know, it's apologia in the same way, like, you know, you could be a Stalin apologist, you know, or a Hitler apologist. It's like something that's commonly accepted as like bad, and you're trying to redeem an aspect of it. But a lot of people, just the bare bone. I went to a bookstore when I was in Kentucky, and
they have bookstores in Kentucky?
They do indeed. They're hard to find, but they're there. They are owned and operated by liberals. I will preface.
So in the city of Kentucky,
yes, in the city of Kentucky. No, but I found this copy about because Thomas Jefferson did like an early draft of the Declaration of Independence that wasn't accepted. Like there were things that were cut out. Like a lot of it is similar, but especially there's a big chapter on, or not a chapter, but like a paragraph on slavery and how like in the colonies, you know, we aren't going to have, you know, like the idea that we can enslave another type of human being is abhorrent, and we aren't going to accept that anymore, which was obviously cut out of the Declaration of Independence because there were other interests involved.
They were more concerned with getting rid of the British first.
Yes.
Because I read about that, where like they thought that obviously the southern states wouldn't be as involved in the Revolutionary War if they knew that they were going to, because I mean, the crown was perfectly okay with them keeping their slaves.
Yeah. But you know, I picked up this book because I was like, oh, that seems interesting, you know, because it wasn't just like the text of it was like an expose on like what changed, you know, and I picked it up and I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll get this. I get it. I open up the front cover, and like I said, this bookstore is owned and operated by liberals, and someone, I don't know if it was the owner of the store or it was a used bookstore, so it might have been like a prior owner, had written like inside the cover of the book, like, this book is decent historical, you know, it's decent history, but the author is misguided in his assumption that Thomas Jefferson was against slavery and racism. And it's like the idea that America is this big bad boogeyman that has to be gotten rid of is something that is so ingrained in our culture that even just the implication of looking at it in a different way, looking at it with a different perspective is rejected. And that goes into what we're talking about reading. You know, it's like, I fucking hate Nazis, but I've read some of like the significant works in the history of fascism.
People need to continue to read them.
Exactly, because how do you know why something is wrong without fully understanding the argument?
The idea. How do you defend an idea that you don't understand, or defend against an idea that you don't understand?
Exactly.
Like if our goal is to not fall into fascism and not allow fascist people to gain power.
Then why are people fascist? What drives them towards that?
Most people in America can't even define fascism. They equate fascism to racism.
Yeah.
Which racism can be a component of fascism, but
it can also be a component of it's not a decisive component, because
not all racist people are fascists.
Exactly.
There's racist socialists.
Well,
they're very racist socialists. I mean, anyways, so we talked about both of our reading styles.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite book you've ever read?
Favorite book I've ever read?
If you had to pick one just off the top of your head, like if I was gonna throw you on an island, and I guess it could be one you're reading right now, but if there's one book that this is the last book you ever take with you, what would you take?
Well, the thing is, if I'm going to be stuck on a desert island, I mean, I'm going to take like something like the Bible. Probably just
I guess that's a hard question for us.
Yeah,
That's like, what I would have said too, probably. I was thinking, as I was saying it.
Yeah, I don't think the Bible is my favorite book.
Okay, 3 books.
3 books, okay.
The Bible, the Quran, and the...
something that I'll never finish, even if I'm stuck on a desert, like War and Peace or something, just a very long fiction book. I don't know. I feel like if you're stuck on a deserted island, your capacity to you could, if I bring War and Peace, I'm going to be like, yeah, I would really understand and relate to this if I wasn't stuck on a fucking deserted island.
I wasn't alone. Yeah, I'd probably bring some sort of like foraging book, maybe.
Yeah, some hard science to help me get through.
Navigation.
But my favorite book, I don't know. You go. Do you have an answer?
I don't.
You don't. It's hard. It's hard. Okay, how about what is a book?
A book I very much enjoy.
Okay.
That is not even very of a deep book.
Mm-hmm.
Into the Wild. Jack Kerouac.
I don't know how to say it either, but I think it's Kerouac. I think it's like some
French
sort of
damn
thing.
Polish people. Oh, French, whatever.
Maybe Polish too.
But obviously, it's about the kid. It's Alex Vandertrump or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
He creates a fake name. I don't know, but it's beautiful. A story of a child, and I read it at the same time as Walden.
Yeah.
I had a goal. I wanted to just live in the woods, go full Kaczynski, but
Mm-hmm.
he crashes his car, fakes his death, hikes all the way to Alaska, would have survived had he not eaten some poisonous berries, was almost through the winter. It's just a beautiful story of like human will and just like the desire to like find yourself. And with this modern world, I think that's something that especially young men and me as a young man I felt disconnected from everything, and I think he was looking for God. And I think that's why I've been drawn to nature my whole life, is I feel more connected and like I feel more in company. Like there's more around me when I'm alone in nature than in a busy city street.
See, okay, I have a very similar answer to you in terms of like one book that I probably would bring it on a desert island, honestly. And it's by a fellow that's also named Jack, and has a very similar name to the Call of the Wild.
I thought you were speaking about Into the Wild the other day when you said that.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, actually no.
Yeah, Call of the Wild by Jack London.
I think I've read it, but I don't know.
You probably have.
He wrote White Fang as well.
Yes,
I read White Fang.
Yes,
okay.
and
White Fang was amazing.
White Fang is like the inverse of Call in the Wild. I'm pretty sure White Fang is about like a wolf that becomes like a domestic dog, and Into the Wild is about, or Call of the Wild, is about a domestic dog that becomes a wolf.
Because it's the one where he's sledding. He's on like a sledding team, and then the dog gets away or whatever.
Yeah, and it joins like a wolf pack. It's a really fucking good book. Jack London is an amazing author.
He loves his dogs.
He does. He has an infatuation. That's a really good one.
Very poignant.
Yeah, that's one of the books where I can't think of any reason why someone shouldn't read it and why someone shouldn't enjoy it.
So that gets me on to my next question.
Okay.
So we've been talking a lot today about things you should read and that we should read, and there are books that are probably more important and more applicable than others. Say I am someone who's never really read. I just got out of the modern American school system, so I've read like 3 books in my entire life.
Okay.
2 of them had mostly pictures. And what would you recommend me to read? Obviously, I tell everyone to read the Bible.
I think whatever religion you are,
read that text.
Always read your text.
Yeah.
Always, and not like, oh, I read it once, now I'm done, but like continually come back to it.
Study it. Like I think I I think my goal is to just never stop reading the Bible.
Yes.
Just continue every day, read a little bit, and just keep going through it. Because I feel like you will never understand all of it.
No.
No matter how many, no one ever has.
Even Martin Luther, when I was at church the other day, the pastor was talking about the God, oh God, why have you forsaken me verse. In I think it's in Matthew.
It's like your favorite verse, correct?
It's one of my favorites.
Also, like Jesus wept is a cool one.
Yeah, but for the reason it's one of my favorites is because it is so baffling. It's inherently, it seems contradictory. It seems like it doesn't make sense. And Martin Luther agreed with me. He sat down, he sat down and meditated and fasted on this one verse because he had the same opinion of me, opinion that I have, where it's like, this doesn't make sense. And even him, the founder of Protestantism, the one of the the only like religious thinkers that Protestants even know about. No slight on them, but
that was a slight on Protestants.
That was a slight on Protestants.
You should feel bad.
No. Even him, after he fasts and he studies just this verse for a very long time, and even him, he throws his hands down and says, God forsaken by God. How is a man to wrap his head around this? So and that's one of the that like you were saying, you're never gonna fully understand it, but it will deepen your understanding.
Trying to, you will deepen. And I think that the Bible and the Quran, like these religious texts, if you want to understand thinking and understand this idea of like ideas,
yeah,
every single sentence, like one sentence out of this book that's millions of sentences, you can take that one sentence, God, oh God, why have thou forsaken me?
Mm-hmm.
And you can literally study that, and online and other places, there's books written on
just
sentences.
Just a sentence.
Like, so it is infinite, and the idea of like, if you can read the Bible and actually gain something from it and understand and quote, you can, everything else is easy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because a lot of it is built off of these biblical ideas.
That's what I was going to say is, the influence of these of religious texts in general, the Bible in specific for Western civilization is inarguable. So even if it doesn't speak to you personally, you're still, by interacting with it, going to gain a deeper understanding of the world that you live on, because the world that you live around, what surrounds you, like the institutions, the culture that surrounds you, because it's so, find me one fictional story, contemporary fictional story that isn't in some way informed by the Bible.
It is mirrored by the Bible. There's not. Literally, and that's one thing the Old Testament really provides for us, is these common tropes, like the Adam and Eve, like the forbidden fruit, Noah and the ark, Cain and Abel, Exodus, like being banished, like the idea of Moses and how he grew up as being different, like all of these things, like every single person can find a part of the Bible in which their life mirrors too.
Exactly.
And that's like almost this, I hate to say it, this like Jungian idea that that there's these archetypes, which I think it's like duh, but like you built your entire career on that.
This is an anti-Jung podcast.
No. I shuddered even saying the word. He who shall not be named. That's how we're going to refer to him from now on. But I think it's important for people to understand. And yes, apparently there are people that read the entire Bible and remain atheists. I don't know how that happens. I'm sorry for those people, because that's got to be a dry life you're living. But I just think like this is the starting point for everything.
Yeah.
And you can gain endless knowledge, not even about, and a lot of people think it's just solely spiritual, but even just of how you should be in a business situation, how you should handle your relationships with people, like why you shouldn't eat certain things, why you should take things off. Like they explain why the Sabbath is good and why you should rest, and how to treat law and how to treat rulers and authorities in your society, and when you should follow them and when you should not. And
then just the cultural, intellectual heritage of it, like just a trajectory that people don't really think about, that always seems poignant to me, is Hegel, his dialectical triad, synthesis or thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, is based on the Holy Trinity.
Yes. That
dialectical triad informs Marx's materialist dialectics. Therefore, in Marx influencing, the governance of half of the fucking planet, in the 20th century. All because you can trace the lineage of that, something you wouldn't necessarily associate with Christianity, something you wouldn't even necessarily associate with spiritualism. You can trace that lineage to the Bible,
because the first scholars were, Jewish scholars.
Yeah,
were like, and people don't realize the pragmatism of the early Catholic and early Orthodox churches. Like, these people were not just, and you see it with a lot of priests nowadays, and it is one thing that kind of, I know, turns a lot of people away from the more traditional Christian denominations, where they're just like, oh, we'll just read scripture. But a lot of these old people, like the Thomas Aquinas and like these old Orthodox, like from like the ecumenical councils, that's what it was. They weren't just saying, oh, Jesus said this is law. They're like studying what was meant by this.
Yeah, what does this mean? How does this carry over into what we're doing? Not just here's the book, figure it out, but the actual act of figuring it out.
So it was the birth of critical thinking, and not even the birth, because obviously in ancient Greece there was, but of modern critical, like pragmatic, almost like scientific thinking. Like, I think a lot of science came from the Bible. We look at, a lot of scientific inventions around that period, like genetics. The guy who did the pea experiment, it's I forgot. Anyways, there was a monk. It was a monk in, I believe. Okay. Okay. And cut. All right. What was I talking about?
Pea experiment.
Okay.
Monks playing with pea.
So there was a famous monk, I believe, I want to say he was Austrian or something, but he was the one who found out that
explains the
Mendel. Gregor Mendel. He was a monk, and he was studying pea plants, and he found...
Oh, that kind of pea.
No, yeah, not pea, like urine. Okay. Peas. He found that there was genetic transfer between plants, and that you could genetically modify, and you could affect the genetics of things. And it was like early Christians that, Darwin was a Christian.
Yes.
And discovered Darwinian evolution. Like, it's this idea of studying things and wanting to understand the world around you because of the God and everything, and trying to find God.
Right here on the cover of my Bible has a quote from Timothy that says, "Study to show thyself approved unto God." So
exactly.
There's definitely baked into the text itself is a desire to attain knowledge. The logos.
The logos.
The word.
The word. And you have to go out and look for it. Like, obviously, these things have been preached forever, and people don't understand them unless they actually think and sit down and actually talk about it. And so that's why, I guess, to get back to the original point, I think the Bible is probably the first place to start. Other than that, I would probably just go all the way back and start from ancient Greece and work your way forward.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree with that. But for someone who, I wouldn't recommend that to someone who, like you said, hadn't read very much, because you don't want to overwhelm people.
Yeah.
With
that's why a lot of these dialogues are easy though, because it's very short.
But still, it's, I don't know. Like,
what would you say then?
I would just, honestly, if it's a matter of, I've literally someone who's never read a book in their life except for what they've been told to read, and I would say the Bible, because, obviously, but just honestly, any fiction, anything that's easy, whatever is easy for you to read.
You can find God in anything.
Yeah, and it's just about building the habit of sitting down and reading. Because I hear this all the time from people that don't read. Is like, oh, I don't have time. You don't have time. So you can sit on your phone for hours at a time. You can watch Netflix for hours at a time.
Filling every hour every day with work.
Yeah, but you can't sit down with a book. That's why I would recommend. That's why I would recommend whatever you can find enjoyment in, just because then it'll build the habit, and then you can work off of that. And you often, some of the best recommendations for books that I've ever gotten have come from books that I was reading, where the author will reference something and I'm like, well, what's that about?
And I even think in the modern aspect, the physical book is important, and I do think that people should read and actually sit down, because I think reading makes you have to formulate these things in your head.
Yes.
But if you're going to consume media, make that media helpful to you and help grow you spiritually or intellectually. I'll watch TV is what I say.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm looking at a TV screen, I'm watching a lecture, a debate, I'm watching a current event, news thing.
Yeah.
I pretty much only watch YouTube. I don't watch television shows because I don't see a point in consuming that media. But you don't like say you're just someone like your head hurts when you look, and there's people that have like dyslexia, so they can't read very well.
Mm-hmm.
You can listen to audiobooks. You can watch, like, I watch tons of lectures, and people don't realize you can basically get a college education on YouTube. You can watch Harvard professors talk about constitutional law. You can watch theology. You can watch people debate each other and see these ideas fleshed out in real time.
Yeah.
And that's why I love a debate, because I want to see the guy who has my ideas have to defend them, and how he defends them, and how he creates these logical frameworks.
Or even two dudes you disagree with both of them.
On both of them.
Yeah, who's gonna come out,
and you get to see people build these arguments, and it's like a battle. You get to watch the battle happen, and you get to see why they failed, and you have to it's just about growing yourself. And I think after a while, if you do it enough, you do find there's a certain like love for it. Once you develop that love for learning and that love for understanding, it's kind of an addiction in a way.
Absolutely.
Like, I want to be smarter than I was yesterday. I would love for every 6 months to look back and be like, gosh, that guy was an idiot.
Absolutely.
And I have pretty much consistently thought I think I was an idiot 3 weeks ago. I'm pretty sure. Like,
Yeah.
And that's growth, though.
I think that's part of, like, for me, it's not necessary. I think reading is very important, because rather than some kind of passive medium where you're watching a lecture, you're listening to it. Reading, you have to actively engage yourself in, which I feel like that kind of, you can't listen to a book and get the same experience as sitting, because you're gonna check out for a couple seconds.
The audiobook Bible people, I can't.
Yeah,
because they don't know even what like.
Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about.
It's frustrating.
So I wouldn't say that, but in spite of that, like, reading is very important. Reading physical books, I think, is even more important. Having books in your home, I think, is also very important.
Yes.
But having a desire to learn triumphs over all of that, because the one will lead, like, you can read books, but if you don't have the desire to learn, you're going to get burnt out on it and you're going to stop doing it. But if you have the desire to learn without having to resort to reading physical books, you're eventually going to get there. You're eventually going to get to the point where, like, oh, well, this is a subject that interests me. This is a subject that I want to understand deeper.
And a book is a deep dive.
Yes, that's what a book does, is,
And I think in that way, a lot of American youth and just modern American people have been sold short, because we're taught that you go to high school and you can either go to college or not. But once you're done with your education in that sense, if you get out of college, most people stop learning. They're just done. So you think that was maybe 20% of their life, 15% of their life, 10%. So the next 90, 80 years, you're just going to do nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you go to work, you have a good time, you go watch some movies, but you learn nothing else. You ask most people, they have not thought philosophically about anything since they were in high school, if they even did think about anything.
Or even just basic history stuff. Like,
yeah.
That's another good gateway in, is like, is there something that just interests you about history? Do you
get that narrative component? It's like a story. You get the facts, and you get this overarching ideal or philosophy of the events that you understand.
Yeah. How did this lead to where I am now?
Because history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme.
Yeah,
it does rhyme.
It's like Star Wars.
Really? What do you mean?
I don't know. That was something that George Lucas said about Star Wars.
George Lucas is insane. Don't read any George Lucas. Don't watch Star Wars. No, I'm kidding. I love Star Wars. But the new ones did suck. So I think
we're not going to get into that.
We're not going. That'll be a different episode. So I think we can sum it up with that. My closing statement would be, find a love for learning, and your life will consistently get better. Chase wisdom, not knowledge, and test your beliefs by fire. Absolutely. You should be the hardest advocate for the things you don't believe in.
Yeah. You
should be able to argue the things you don't believe in better than the things you believe in, and that's how you know 100%. You're really getting like somewhere.
100%. I guess I would say, I'm going to keep mine, because you covered that. I agree with you 100%. Just in terms of concrete, like, if you're a religious person, read whatever religious text you ascribe to, and read it frequently.
Daily.
Yeah, if not daily, then at least, just that's what I'm going to get into, is make a habit out of it. If you read a book and then you go 2 months without reading a book, then
You don't read.
you're gonna lose out on that time that you could have spent furthering your knowledge. But also at the same time, and we could go off on this, for another hour. If you do read frequently, you do have to stop reading and process. And I think that
Yes.
writing is a very good way to formulate that, to refine. Let's say you read your 3 books. Let's say you read for a year, and you take a month off, and you just kind of write something. Or just let it sit with you. Don't.
But keep it there.
Yeah,
think on it.
Reading pages, like, don't. That's not how you count what you're learning. You count what you're learning off of your ability to understand things. So if I could read 1,000 pages in a day. Am I going to retain any of that information? Probably. I mean, maybe 20 pages out of it.
Yes.
Because you're not reading to learn. You shouldn't ego lift, and you shouldn't ego read.
Exactly. It mirrors lifting in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
You can't spend all your time in the gym. You're not working out so that you can be better at working out. You're working out so you can live a better life. You're reading so that you can apply this knowledge and have a better life. And I think that's really where it starts. Read the great works. Read your religious texts.
Yes.
You want to get to the point where when you go to bed and you didn't read that day, you're like,
yeah, you feel bad about it.
I forgot to read today.
Exactly.
I didn't read anything. I'm like, I feel like I'm getting behind.
Yeah.
But I think that's where I'd leave off. You got any final notes?
Read Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific by Frederick Engels.
And if you find a Carl Jung book, just burn it.
Yeah, just do something. I don't
for the good of humanity.
Purchase it and then lock it away or something. I don't know.
Yeah, just throw it in the ocean, tie it to a cinder block.
Yeah.
They'll find it in 10,000 years from now.
We do advocate book burning on this, but just there's a specific list. It's not.
We'll be posting a book burning list.
Yeah. Yes. Okay.
All right.
That's about it.
That's about it.
All right. Now we're gonna get into the current events, news
segment,
news stuff. So, a guy named Vivek Ramaswamy is apparently running for president. Apparently.
We fact check us on this.
Yeah, because I don't know much about this guy. And what I have heard from him isn't very promising. He seems to be taking the DeSantis approach to the Ukraine-Russia conflict, which is to be retarded. In that, and I'll just quote him directly. This is from the Daily Beast. The interview, I think, was on CNN, but this is taken from the Daily Beast. He apparently went on record saying, "I think the job of the U.S. president is to look after American interests. And what I think the number one threat to the U.S. military right now is," I guess he didn't say that properly, "our top military threat is the Sino-Russian alliance." Later he says, "I think that by fighting further in Russia, by further arming Ukraine, we are driving Russia into the hands of the Chinese. And that the Sino-Russian alliance is the top threat we face." This mirrors Ron DeSantis, who has gone on record saying that countering Russia is not a vital national interest, and instead checking the economic, cultural, and military power of the Chinese Communist Party is. This seems to be like the new line of the Republicans.
So like the neoconservative platform?
Yeah. And I just don't, and maybe you can help me understand it. I don't understand how you can think that us funneling guns and money to a small state that is engaging in a territorial conflict with a bigger state in one scenario is a bad thing, but then doing the exact same thing in another scenario is a good thing. I also don't understand why it's just assumed that China is a concern of the American people. I don't get it.
I think and we mentioned this earlier. I think the only real threat we face from China is an economic threat, just because we're not competing. We're not even in the same game as they are.
Yeah,
and that's the only threat. Like, I don't think China. If you asked a Chinese member of the CCP, is America a threat, and they would probably laugh at you. Like we don't like. People want to say that there's this sort of like existential threat from China that we're going to go to war. Why would China need to go to war with us?
There's no there, and that's what I can't wrap my head around.
Nothing to gain from us anymore. We've basically sold ourselves to them.
They have no interest in what, taking over the United States.
They're on top.
Yeah, they didn't have to do that to beat us.
They already hold the power in the world.
Yeah,
at this point, and I think that the whole idea with my understanding of the whole Ukraine conflict and why we feel the need to be involved is, I think that we've kind of had this policy of destabilization.
Exactly.
Under the guise of trying to stabilize a region. But it's like, if you destabilize everyone else in the world, you're kind of the last one standing.
Exactly.
And that's kind of where we've been for the past, 30 or 40 years?
Yeah, since at least the collapse of the USSR.
And I think that that's kind of what we're trying to, because I think we assumed that Russia would never actually go to war with us, which I think in the current climate, that's not even a possibility of them actually like having all-out war. If anything, it'd be some sort of Cold War, which arguably we've already entered into with Russia.
I think, yeah, that's like
a second Cold War. And I think that America is prepared, and not only prepared, but is like looking forward to that.
Certain aspects of America,
of the American government,
yeah.
And we view this proxy war in the Ukraine as a way to destabilize them and, I don't know, prevent or cause civil unrest. It's also a whole NATO thing.
Yeah, I think that's the prime thing is if Russia wins in Ukraine, that means that our leverage is gone. That means that the ability for the United States government and the United States military to exert control over the rest of the world is non-existent anymore.
Exactly.
And it's already kind of just the act of Russia, invading Ukraine is
like,
already showing that that's not as much of a problem for the rest of the world.
They're not afraid of NATO. No one's afraid of NATO.
But for them to defeat the Ukrainian government, to defeat the Ukrainian military, would be an even bigger slap in the face.
Yes.
But my thing is, I think that there's a chance that Russia could lose in Ukraine.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a single chance that China could lose in Taiwan. It just doesn't make any sense. There's already, like, it's an island that is already effectively surrounded. And I don't think there's any way that the U.S. intervention could play a decisive role in changing the fact that Taiwan is a part of China, and it always has been a part of China.
And this is ignoring the fact that I don't think protecting Taiwan from China or preventing Russia from invading Ukraine does anything to benefit the United States. If anything, it negatively impacts, I feel like Ukrainian citizens and Taiwanese citizens, because I mean, Taiwan is basically like a little market economy hub outside of China that's still basically in a way supported by China, because it's all basically Chinese people that live there and go back and forth, and like without
and
China,
they get all their natural resources from China.
Get everything from China. They're dependent on China. Ukraine is basically like Texas in America. It's like, or like Hawaii or like Puerto Rico.
Texas is actually a really good analogy for Ukraine.
It is,
because it's always been a part of Russia. It's just that certain elements
of it are different.
Yeah, and they don't want, and some aspects of the culture don't want to be a part of Russia, but they are and will
and
be.
Is a war worse for the Ukrainian people than just being a part of Russia? And what the heck does it have to do with the United States and these neoconservatives? They're running on this America First platform. All of them.
Yes.
And you hear it out of DeSantis' mouth, we're going to do what's good for America. That wasn't a good DeSantis voice. We're going to do what's good for, I don't know.
It's okay.
I'm trying. But how can you run simultaneously that we're going to do what's the best for America?
Put America first.
But let's just keep throwing. We're at like $32 trillion in debt now.
Mm-hmm.
32 trillion.
Yeah.
32 2 trillion, and we're sending hundreds of billions of dollars worth of supplies to Ukraine. And yes, maybe like eventually we might get something back if Ukraine happens to win the war,
which seems increasingly unlikely.
Yes, and I mean, and there's reports that they're not doing as well as we're hearing they're doing.
Yeah,
like
those Pentagon leaks. But that was basically the crux of the entire leak, was that, you know, Ukraine is not even close to winning.
Yeah, I think that Russia, as a country, it's like, to go back to the Texas analogy, if Texas seceded, or if some geopolitical thing happened where Texas kind of became its own state, which it is, I mean, its own actual country.
Yeah.
If we wanted to annex or get Texas back in, we're not going to destroy Texas completely. Those are still American people, because the Ukrainian people are part of that like Soviet nation, you know?
Yeah, they're Russian. I mean, they've been a part of Russia I mean, one of the things that Putin said early on in this conflict was that Ukraine was invented by Vladimir Lenin. And it sounds crazy, but it kind of was true. I mean, the majority of Ukrainian citizens prior to Lenin's attempt to like vitalize a independent Ukrainian culture just identified as Russians. You know, they spoke a different language, but they were still Russian. They were part of the Russian Empire.
It's like Scotland. I think there was a sentiment at one point a few years ago where Scotland was trying to secede from the United Kingdom, and it's like, why?
Yeah, or even, you know, this might be more controversial, but like Irish independence. It's like, guys, come on.
You're so interconnected.
Yes, you're absolutely dependent on each other. There's no. You might achieve some level of formal independence, but you will never sever like the actual economic and political and cultural dependence that you do have.
You're both Anglos.
Yeah.
Now that's where like the UN, I understand,
or
not the UN, the
EU.
EU.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a lot of different cultures involved in that, so that's why it's not been as cohesive. But something like England and Ireland, or Ukraine and Russia,
yes,
or even like Poland and Russia, like they're so similar. It was like Germany and Austria. That's why it was so easy for Hitler to move into Austria, because they're basically the same thing.
Yeah,
they're the same. They're that Germanic culture, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I think about DeSantis. And what is it? Shawarma. What is his name? Rami Shawarma.
That's not his name. But I literally have to be reading it to even tell you what his name is, because
I don't think he has much of a chance.
Well, my thing with all these Republicans is like, I can't distinguish them. I can't, like, aside from Donald Trump is the only one that I can actually point at and be like, okay, yeah, he has different policies. But every other Republican I've seen, they're all DeSantis. It's like,
oh, Chris Christie has also announced his
I remember him from 2016, but I genuinely don't know anything
why
about him.
And I get it. DeSantis has a much better chance.
That's like Ted Cruz announcing that he's going to run.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, or Jeb Bush. That would be something.
Oh gosh. On that note, what do you think about, what is it, RFK?
RFK Jr. Yeah, RFK Jr.
I think he has some decent ideas. I can't get past the guy's voice.
Dude, he's got no sauce. He sounds like he has smoked a million cigarettes.
You put that guy in a debate with Trump, and you're not even going to hear him.
No,
you know. No. Trump's going to be like, "What's wrong with your voice, man? What,
he has weak lungs."
Yes. So, do you have any other current event points?
On RFK, apparently, I have no sources to back this up. It's just something that one of my family members said. Apparently, he gets a lot of money from Falun Gong, the like Chinese the Chinese dissent group. It's like a weird religious community that was oppressed by the Chinese government. Apparently, they get a lot of money from. No, it was the Epoch Times. The Epoch Times is owned by Falun Gong, which is a weird religious minority based out of. Like, not based out of China. They were from China, and now they're based out of the United States.
Okay.
And they've been pushing RFK Jr. really hard, which is very sus.
Very sus.
Very sus. Very weird.
So, basically just
the only juice that RFK Jr. has is that he's an anti-vaxxer, and that's literally it. That his last name is Kennedy, and that he's an anti-vaxxer.
He's trying to be the Trump of the Democratic Party, I believe, in my opinion.
But he's got no sauce. If he came out,
Democrats don't really have sauce.
If he came out like his uncle, I guess JFK would have been his uncle. I don't know. Yeah. If he came out like his uncle and was like, "Yeah, I want to destroy the CIA," then I would be like, "This kid's got some sauce."
Which he has said a lot of things against the CIA, but he calls them the fourth branch, I think.
But he's not bold enough.
He's not.
No.
And I think Donald Trump is, and to get to Donald Trump, he has now been indicted for what, the 50th time this year.
Yeah, so definitely up there.
So this time is so it's because apparently he has classified documents still from when he was a president or something to that nature. They haven't released a lot of specific information, but apparently his home in Mar-a-Lago, they found these documents and they're trying to prosecute him.
Hoarding, just on a kind of related note, hoarding classified documents is based.
It is based, and it's not like he's leaking them. It's not like he's doing anything. He is. I mean, he is still President Trump. He is still a president for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And the thing that pisses me off about this is if we want to prosecute people for harboring these documents and keeping them after their presidencies or letting them out, we have to be continuous across the board. I mean, we caught Biden just last year doing the same exact thing. He had them in his garage next to a car, like a Corvette. I mean, if you want to talk about leaking stuff, I mean, Hillary Clinton literally created a separate email to have these government conversations outside of
a private email,
and those got leaked, and all kinds of classified stuff was leaked. It happens all the time. Either we have to prosecute people for this or not.
Yeah, and it's obvious as to why, Biden wasn't held accountable for any of these actions, and Trump is. It's because they want to prevent Trump from being able to run.
And they're really just adding fuel to the fire.
I know, and then the fact that the last indictment didn't work and that they're trying it again with different charges is evidence to the fact. It's obvious that there's no actual legislative, legal reason for them to be doing this. They're not trying to uphold justice. They're not trying to.
It's all for political reasons.
It is just to keep Trump out of the office.
The entire judicial power of the United States government basically is aimed at Trump, except for the Supreme Court. But
yeah,
a lot of these organizations, they're trying to just take him down in any way they possibly can, but they're literally just they're creating a martyr out of him and adding fuel to the fire. But what I will say, and I mean you've spoke on this before, I don't think that it's smart for the Trump campaign to just rest on this. I think they almost need to just not even speak about it.
Yeah, just act like it's not happening.
Because you can't run as a populist and
try to get people to feel sorry for you.
Yeah, no, you have to be a leader. You have to say, despite all of this, I know I'm taking this on and they're doing this to me, but I'm taking on all of this for you guys. Exactly. I'm going to make it through this. Instead of saying, look at these shady Democrats that are trying to prosecute me. That's why you need to vote for me, because they're going to... No. I mean, and you could reword it. They're trying to prosecute me and use the government for their own aim. They could do that to you.
Yeah.
That's why.
There's a way to talk about it without making it, feel sorry for me.
Because I don't care. You signed up to be president.
Yeah.
The other party is trying to... Yes. Oh well. Win the election. Talk to the people. And I heard it, and it's the people that voted for Trump last time are going to vote for him again.
Absolutely.
What you need to get is those undecided voters. And you're not going to get those undecided voters by saying, hey, if you talk to somebody who hasn't decided whether they would vote for Biden or Trump next time, and they're this independent and they don't know who they're going to vote for, if Trump comes in and says, oh, the Democrats are persecuting me, so you should vote for me, that's not going to convince them.
Or like a DeSantis shill, like someone whose whole basis for supporting DeSantis is, oh, he's more electable than Trump. You're not going to get him over to your side by saying, oh, but the Democrats are persecuting me. Because they still have a fundamental belief that you are an unwinnable candidate. That you cannot beat Joe Biden, which is misguided. But you prove to them that it's not.
You have to, and he needs to get back to his policies.
Yeah,
talking about policy. There's so many things going on right now that need to be addressed by these candidates. Like, they need to address the Ukraine crisis. They need to address the debt ceiling. They need to address this immigration issues.
Yeah,
and how these states are handling them. And I think he's kind of riding on the Roe v. Wade, and he's kind of riding on the fact that the Democratic Party is persecuting him. But
he needs to. The thing that got him to win in 2016 is that he fundamentally differentiated himself from every single political actor that was running against him. And a lot of Republicans have taken notes of that, and now he has to further differentiate himself. He has to work harder than he did in 2016.
Yes.
That was his failure in 2020.
Yes.
Was that he just kind of was trying to ride off of the, I'm president, vote for me. He wasn't like,
let's keep this train going. But it's like, well, what are you bringing to the table now? Things have changed in the last 4 years, obviously.
And I don't think he'll do it, but I think one of the things that we mentioned earlier that could fundamentally differentiate him from the rest of the Republican Party is dropping this China shit.
Yes.
It's not in anybody's interest. It's not in the American people's interest. And every single Republican that is not Trump seems to think that it is. So all you'd have to do is point out the truth of the situation. Hey, these people want, the shit we're doing in Ukraine, that's what they want to do in Taiwan. That's what all of these Republicans, and now you are unique. You are completely, it's not just that you're Donald Trump and you're orange and you're loud. It's that you have a different policy. You have a different view of what is possible in America.
Which is why he won in 2016. He won because he got a lot of those blue working class states,
because he was anti-war.
He was anti-war,
anti-intervention.
He was bringing his plans were to bring industry back to the United States, bring manufacturing, bring these real jobs back to the United States, not just giving people money, giving people purpose, bringing back America to what it was. And running on this, oh poor me, the Democrats are so bad, is not going to win. No, it's not going to win over those voters.
It doesn't make you, like, Donald Trump in 2016 was a populist strongman. That's literally his whole MO was I'm going to go up on this debate stage and I'm going to talk about how your wife is ugly.
I'm running as a Republican just because it fits me the best. But I think, if there was a possible third option and to get elected, Trump would have ran as an independent.
Yeah.
But he's now taking this Republican stance where his whole platform is anti-democratic.
Yeah.
Anti-democrats. Lowercase.
Yes. I was going to say,
I guess that'd be uppercase, Democrat.
Never give them credit for being democratic.
Yes.
They've proven that much this year.
And I think that's really something that we're gonna have to look for in the next coming weeks, as all of these Republican candidates are starting to announce their campaigns. He's gonna have to differentiate himself.
Yes,
and he may wait for the debates to do that. Which he's an entertaining debater. I would not say he is the best debater.
I don't know,
because I watched his debates and I didn't really learn anything about his policy from the debates. I went to a Trump rally. I didn't really learn anything about his policy from the rally, but in 2016 he did talk about his plans, and people agreed with those plans, and that's why they voted for him. And it was the undecided voters. He had Amish people coming out for the first time. That's why he won Pennsylvania. He had these people that don't vote, and didn't like the system, that all came out, and that's why he won. And he's playing this game where now with Biden he's going to have to win by 1% or something. He's going to have to win a couple hundred votes. Where it's like, no, you need those people that aren't decided. We've got blue voters and we've got red voters. Stop campaigning to the Republicans. They're gonna vote Republican.
Exactly, and that's the strategy of people like. The thing is, people like DeSantis. What I've seen out of the modern Republican Party that isn't Trump, the non-MAGA Republican Party, people like DeSantis and that other guy whose name I can't pronounce. They're not trying to win over non-voters. They're trying to win over Democrats. They're trying to, they've got their Republican voters. They're trying to win over people who don't like Biden, who want a more conservative Democrat in office, which just means that they're being more moderate than they should be. They're being less, they're not differentiating themselves. They're trying to grab a block of voters that are undecided about Biden, but who traditionally vote Democrat. And Trump, that worked for Trump, but it wasn't his winning over of Democrat voters that got him elected. Like you said, it was his winning over of non-voters, winning over people who had no faith in the system, no faith in voting, had never voted in their life.
Because we had record voter turnout in 2016.
Exactly.
Because of that. And I'm excited to see what happens. I'm excited for the debates. I'm excited and we'll probably cover a lot of that.
It's going to be a shit
This
show.
election cycle is going to be a fun one.
Yeah.
Going to be a stressful one. Weird caveat. I've heard whisperings.
Whisperings of what?
The Miss Clinton is thinking about reappearing.
Hillary?
I'm thinking that the Democratic Party might really not trust Biden's ability to win another election. Just because, you hear it even from Democratic voters that they would never vote Republican. But they'll tell you...
to run Hillary again? That's insane. Nobody, I've never met a normal human being.
They love that lady for some reason.
Really? I've never met a normal human being that's like, yeah, I really like Hillary Clinton.
Well, we've got these leftists that aren't normal human beings.
That's true.
And I think that would be a failure because they would not win over the...
No, you couldn't win over anyone with Hillary.
Except for the people that would already just be voting for you anyways. But yeah, I think that's the state of American politics right now. It's really, it's a toss-up at the moment. You asked me 2 months ago, I would have said Trump has a very good chance of winning the next election.
Yeah.
6 months ago, I would have said that. Right now, I don't even know if he's going to win the candidacy. I mean, I don't.
Yeah.
And
I do say my prediction with if he doesn't win the candidacy, he's gonna run independent, and then that's gonna hand it over to the Democrats.
Yes, because we're just going to split the Republican vote.
Yeah.
Which is the worst thing they could do. And I think that the GOP as a whole is kind of playing this dumb. When we could consolidate our vote and focus on getting those other people, whereas it's there. I hate the idea of just splitting your Republican vote. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And making the DeSantis people mad that Trump got nominated, or making the Trumpers mad that DeSantis. Because I could see a lot of these Trumpers, if Trump doesn't get nominated, just not voting at all.
Exactly.
And then we give it to the Democrats again.
Exactly.
But
or he runs independent and you give it to the Democrats again. The only hope that the Republican Party has is to nominate Trump.
And DeSantis is a sleeper Dem.
He is.
He's working for the.
He's a Dem in red paint.
He is, and I mean, I don't know. It's a weird time, but we're gonna have to touch on this again. We'll see the updates and how this progresses. I'm sure there's gonna be a lot more Republican candidates announcing their campaigns soon. I don't even know many of the Democratic candidates other than RFK and Biden, possibly Hillary. But as long as Kamala doesn't become president or something, so I think her career is effectively done.
I think if the Democrats even consider running, that's one of the things I do appreciate about RFK running is that a huge block of Democrats will just vote for him because his last name is Kennedy. So that might have a chance of splitting. But he hasn't had any sauce. I haven't seen anything that's like,
and that is important.
Wow.
One thing about Obama, I didn't like a lot of his policy, but the man had sauce.
He was dripping sauce.
No one can argue with that. I mean, Bill Clinton dripping in sauce. George Bush.
Bill Clinton was dripping in other things.
Yes, he was. But I think that's a good summation right there.
Yeah.
RFK has no sauce.
Biden has no sauce.
Trump seems to be playing this wrong.
He's losing his sauce like rapidly.
DeSantis is an undercover Dem, and the shawarma guy, I just don't even know. I love shawarma, but I don't know about this guy. All right, so now to our book club. Partisan's book club.
So just to catch everybody up, we are reading the Gospel according to John, and this episode we have read 10 chapters of the book of John. If you want to read along with us, that would be fantastic. But we're going to be discussing the first 10 chapters. In the next episode, we will finish out the book of John and move on to something else.
And just for everyone's edification, we do have two separate translations. We have the King James and the New International Version, which is becoming a more common version,
yes.
Kind of more of a plain word version of the Bible. So some of these quotes, if they seem different, are because they're from different translations.
They are different, yes.
Which I think is important. I think it's good to read different translations just to get different ideas of the same concepts. But I'd like to start with, Sal, would you like to read the first couple of verses? I'd like the King James Version of John.
Stop me whenever
I gotcha.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehend it not.
I think that's a very poignant section.
Yes.
And I think this is something that a lot of people really just kind of read past when they get into John. They want to get into, they try to push forward to the red lettering a lot of times.
Yes.
Which is important. The word of Jesus is paramount in the New Testament.
Yes.
But this idea that John is writing about, that in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I think that's a very important notion to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Because we talk a lot about abstractions.
Yeah.
This idea of the logos and this thing outside of you. And I've been wrestling with these phrases for a while because it's kind of weird how they say it, but it's that the word, the idea is God. And that kind of gives us this less of the man in the sky and more of like God as being this thing you can't explain.
Yeah, and later on in John, Jesus refers to God. I'm not going to pull up the exact verse right now, but Jesus refers to God. He says God is the Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So again, this kind of understanding that rather than a man in the sky, rather than a personage, God is something beyond that, something more like you said, abstract.
Yes, and it's supposed to be hard to understand.
Yes,
and I think a lot of times these broad statements can be some of the most telling statements in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Like Jesus says, "I am,"
Yeah,
and that's could be looked on as something like, oh, like he just said he is, he exists. It's like, no, I am.
Mm-hmm.
God is. The Word is, and I am the Word, and the Word is Him.
Yeah,
and the Word was made, and like,
and that goes into the whole like before Abraham, I was before Abraham existed. Christ was here,
and He will be.
Yeah,
and you see this a lot of times where like speech and language in the Bible is treated with like speech is spiritual.
Yes,
the idea that we have this language is something. It's not, you can't hold on to language, you can't touch it. And language develops basically our spirituality and our world, and our relationship with God is through language. Even in the beginning in Genesis, God, He says, "Let there be light."
Yes,
like it's through the Word that the world is created, and
that Jesus plays into like you said at the beginning of this, where the Word that is God, his first statement, "Let there be light." Prior to that, what was God?
Exactly, just the Word, the logos. But I think this is a very important thing to touch on. This separation of the literal aspects of the Bible and more of these kind of, I don't want to say psychoanalytic, but like metaphysical aspects of everything. Like even with Jesus, like He speaks in parables because He wants you to understand this thing outside. I think that's what Jesus got at a lot when He was speaking to like the Jewish lawmakers and the teachers of the law.
Mm-hmm.
This literal interpretation of everything can kind of distract you from the idea. It's the Word, and the Word is alive.
Yes,
in a way. Like the Bible is a living document.
Yes,
it's alive, and you have to take that idea that Jesus was the Word and apply it to the entire Bible.
And then that plays into later on in the book, constantly throughout John, and throughout the whole of the Gospels. Jesus is constantly confronted by the Pharisees and the Jews as they want a straight answer out of Him. They want, well, say that you're Christ. Say that you're the Son of God. Say it to us. And He constantly either gives them like a half answer, kind of diverts.
He likes to say, "Well, you have now said it."
Yeah, exactly. But the language thing is something I wanted to get on, because there's a poignant verse in here that I feel like a lot of Christians, like you said, they want to get to the red text, they look over some of this stuff, and you tell me, you're definitely more of a biblical scholar than me.
Okay.
You tell me if this does not have drastic implications for our understanding of at least some of the phraseology of the Bible.
Okay.
Where in chapter 1, verse 12, it says, "But as many as received Him, to them gave He power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on His name." Now, John is referring to Christ.
Of course.
He's referring to Jesus here. But constantly we hear the phrase "Son of God" applied exclusively to Christ, especially in Protestant, in Christian circles.
And at the time, He was the only Son of God.
But does this not have the implication that through His coming, we all have the ability, we all gifted with the ability to, like Him in the way that He is the Son of God, become sons of God,
to return like the prodigal son, to become again a child of God.
Yes.
And I think this goes back to that literal interpretation that people want to take of it.
Yes.
It's people, and that's one thing the Jews said in the Bible itself, is like, you cannot be the Son of God. And He's telling them that, like, you becoming part of my flesh, I am the Son of God. He makes these statements all the time.
Yes.
Where He's opening it up for people, the followers of Christ. You can become a child of God, and we are all the children of God. And God is, He even says, the only person you should call Father, the only thing you should call Father is God.
Yes.
He says, I forgot where it is in the Bible, but He literally, and a lot of people take that literally, where you shouldn't call your Father Father, and that's not what He means.
Yeah.
But our Father is God. And he even says it in a few verses down.
Mhm.
In John 1:14, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us.
Yes.
Like
that word becoming flesh, being the personage of God, embodying himself in Christ.
The kingdom of God is within you.
Yes.
And that's a beautiful idea. And I think that's where a lot of Christians, we argue about it as well. And like even when I talk to Muslims, it's they question this idea that Jesus was actually God. But I think it's taking it too literally, because it's like we all have that thing, that humanity is God in us.
Yes.
Like that's what we were given. That's what separates us from the animals. Is God breathed it into us. Breathed the Word. We are the Word, and the Word is, you know.
Yes. And I have a question.
Okay.
So something that I couldn't help but think when I was reading these first 10 chapters is, or it's something that I couldn't help but question, is what exactly, when we say Christ, when we say the Son of God, when Christ says the Son of Man, what exactly is that referring to? What exactly is that talking about? What exactly is being referred to there? What the impression that I get from these first chapters is that the Son of God, Christ, is the embodiment of mankind's self-consciousness. It is
Christ is a state
yes
of being.
Yes, exactly.
It's not his last name. That's not his last name.
Yes. he is Jesus of Nazareth, but he is also Christ. Which, the impression that I got in these first 10 chapters is that Christ is, like I said, that radical self-consciousness. The Son of God is not a particular person, because, like I mentioned, this chapter 1 verse 12, we all have the potential to become sons of God. The Son of God is the personage who is radically aware of his position. He is radically aware. He is conscious of himself as being descendant, rather than like the Pharisees, oh, I'm a follower of Moses. That they say that. Oh, I'm a follower of Abraham. They say that. Christ says, well, I have been sent by God. He's acknowledging himself that first and foremost, he is a descendant of God.
Yes. And I think that's where a lot of these new agey Christians get it confused as well. I've been to some of these churches, and it's a Jesus worshiping ceremony.
Yes.
And I think even Jesus, and maybe I'm speaking out of the wrong side of my mouth here, but I think Jesus would have said, no, like, follow me, do as I do, but
yes,
the glory is to God.
Yes.
The glory is to God. Like, Jesus was not saying worship me. And he did say that at times, but like, he wants us, Jesus is an example of how to act. Moses was a prophet. Moses was a leader.
Yes.
But before then, people kind of got into this idolatry where they worshipped like Elijah and Moses and saw them as higher beings. But Jesus gave us an example of how to be Son of God. So share in Jesus' flesh. Listen to his word. He is the word. He is, and God is.
And a thing that contrasts Jesus with the prior Israelite prophets is later on, when Jesus turns the water into wine. And I'll see if I can find the exact verse here. Essentially, he has the servants of this party he's at turn the water into wine, and then bring that wine to the thrower of the party, the head of the household. And the head of the household says, usually, you save you drink the good wine first, and then save the bad wine for when everybody's good and drunk and doesn't know the difference. But you've presented me the good wine at the end of the party. That is an obvious analogy to Christ's role in the Bible, wherein the Israelites, prophets of the Old Testament leading up to Christ, were guided by God. They spoke directly to God, but they were men. They were mortal men with failings.
Yes.
They were not perfect. Whereas at the end of the Bible, at the end of the party, the good wine appears, the perfect Son of God, the humanity perfected in Christ.
Yes.
The absolute, God conscious individual who does no wrong, is incapable of doing wrong because of his state.
It's this perfect wine. This thing that was water that was not full of anything is now become this greater thing through this sanctification in a way. So the idea of being born again and these transformations coincides with the same idea that we can all become the children of God.
Yeah.
And we technically already are, but you're being born again with God as your Father.
Yes.
And Jesus was born with God as his Father, but that's almost, it shouldn't be taken quite so literally.
Yes.
But it's that we all, like, we have these rulers and we have these things above us that we honor in these fathers, but you have to be born as a child of God, as a son of God.
Yes, what you are, which you already are. You're already breathed in with. It's like we were talking about earlier with the truth being not something that you create, but something you disclose to yourself. It's not that you're becoming something different. It's that you are realizing what you are. You're becoming conscious of what you are, what you were born as.
Exactly, and I think that's really just that first section of John really just touches on that, and it's a beautiful thing, and I probably will be thinking about that for the rest of my life.
Yes.
I definitely don't completely understand it. That's at least what I take from it, is that it's the Son of God is not just Jesus.
Yeah.
He's an example, and we all want to be the children.
He is the most self-conscious version of what we. That's why he refers to himself as the Son of Man.
Yes.
He is the peak of what we can be. He's the most aware of what he actually is.
And it's attainable.
Yes.
Maybe not to do the great works.
And it might not be easy, but...
Even Paul said, and I believe, I think he said this in 2 Corinthians or Galatians, but he he talks a lot, it might have been Romans actually, I don't know. Paul talked a lot. But he says, I resemble Christ, and Christ resembles God, you know? So like he said, you should attain to act as I do.
Yeah.
Because I attain to act as Jesus does. And Jesus is acting how God the Father would like him to act.
Yes.
And so it's like this continuation. It's Paul was a child of God. And I mean, even we see this even in Acts and Romans, where Peter and Paul were healing and performing miracles.
Yeah.
And because they had attained that, they were the Son of God.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a good point. We can now move forward to the next section. We wanted to talk about
the Samaritan woman, or
Jesus speaking to the Samaritan woman is a really important part, because I feel like this is maybe one of the first sections where actually a non-Jew is exposed.
It is
taken in.
At least in John, it is the first.
Well, and the Samaritan woman didn't even know Jesus was Jesus at first.
No.
It's literally the end of John, not the end of John 4, but the end of that first section. He says, I, the one speaking to you, I am he.
Yeah.
I am Jesus. I know that the Messiah is coming, and when he comes, he will explain everything to us.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that faith in this Messiah thing that's even outside of Jesus himself.
Yeah.
You know, that the word is coming, the Logos is coming.
It's also the whole story represents a shift from the Israelites' understanding of their God as a particular God, a God of the Israelites, versus the God of Christianity, the God that Christ comes to represent, being a universal God. It's not a God that is limited by these lines of ethnicity, of sect, of tribe. It is the God of all of us,
the Son of Man.
Yes, exactly.
Jews.
That plays into the whole, like, it's not, Jesus isn't the best Israelite. Jesus isn't the best Jew. He isn't the best Hebrew. He's the best man. He's the best human. He's the embodiment of what a human being can be.
And we talk a lot about that later in the New Testament. They talk about even like with circumcision.
Yeah.
Like the Jews still have this fascination with that. And he says, like, Paul is like, circumcised or uncircumcised. There are circumcised men who are not godly, and there are uncircumcised men who are godly.
Yeah.
It's like this idea of, and that's really what Jesus did, is he brought God to everyone.
Yes.
And he spread it out. And I think that's kind of where the Jews might have misunderstood things. He
Yeah.
kept it as like the God of the Jews, the Jewish God.
Mm-hmm.
Like they call him the King of the Jews. Jesus is just the King.
Yes.
You know what I mean? God is King.
Exactly.
I think the Samaritan woman is beautiful. And I think like these things he talks about, where like this water you drink from the well, you will become thirsty again. But when you drink from the water that I give you, which he's talking about the Holy Spirit, a lot of times water I think is a metaphor for the Holy Spirit
because it's fluid. It's something that flows through everything,
like
and that also,
and you need it to survive, just like water.
That also goes to show kind of the foresight of the Bible. One of the things that that grants credence to this as being a fragment of eternal truth is the Holy Spirit is constantly compared to water. It's constantly alluded to in terms of water, and human beings, which cannot exist without water and are comprised of what, like 70-80% water,
living on a planet made of mostly water,
something that they couldn't have known scientifically, not in the way that we empirically know that people are made out of water. There's some allusion to it. There's some acknowledgement of it. It's connected to the life essence.
It's back to that truth. Finding this, there's these proofs in reality that are almost, I think everything of the physical objective reality is symbolism from God. Like everything you look at, even water and the interaction between water and the sun and the earth, and how things need the sun, they need water, they need it all. They need God, the Holy Spirit, to complete everything. The Trinity, Without water and the sun, we would not be.
They need, like you said, like the sun. They need God shining down on them like a light. They need the Holy Spirit flowing through them, and then to complete the Trinity, they need humanity. You need human beings,
the body,
the Son, the descendant of God.
It's the Trinity, right? Yes, there. Literally everything is a Trinity in this world. The thesis, antithesis, and the synthesis. There's these symbols everywhere. I think that's beautiful. Do you have anything else on the Samaritan woman you'd like?
No,
to talk about?
that was my main.
That is an important one. I think anybody should read that one. And I believe the Samaritan woman, is that only in? I believe there's other Gospels that they talk about it lightly, but I think John is really get in depth into it. The third section, it's in John 9 that I really wanted to get to.
Okay.
Let me flip forward real quick. It's Jesus healing the blind man. It was a man who was born blind. Now, I always think this is kind of funny how Jesus makes him put mud in his eyes. Because there's other people Jesus heals with just touching. There's a woman, I believe a leper, who just touches his cloak. He's healed, and by her faith, she is healed. And I feel like this is kind of an example, just a little tangent. Jesus is going to make the guy prove his faith.
Yes,
because for all he knows, Jesus could be some random guy just telling him to shove mud in his eyeballs.
But the faith that this will heal him is what heals him.
Exactly. You have to go.
Also, when I was reading, because I remember in a conversation we had, you had mentioned that as being one of your, one of the things that you really like about the New Testament. It also prevents the blind man from seeing Christ, the personage of Christ, when he is later interrogated by the Pharisees. So it shows a very strong foresight.
Go and wash his eyes.
Yes, he washes his eyes, and then by that time Jesus is gone. So it saves him from being able to identify Jesus to the Pharisees. Not that he would, because this is, proven to be a man of a strong faith, but it shows a foresight on Christ's part that, he couldn't have possibly accounted for absent, being a divine being.
And the guy, he goes to the Pharisees and they ask him, and he says, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know is I was blind, but now I can see. Says, and then they ask him, like, how did he open your eyes? He's like, I've told you already. He is, I don't know. He must be something. At this point. And
it also shows the Pharisees' infatuation with kind of like the formalism we're talking about, where it's
materialism.
Like, it's like, oh, did he do surgery on? Did he? What did he do?
Is there the point?
Yeah, exactly.
He did a miracle. And later there's a section on spiritual blindness where Jesus basically says that these Pharisees are spiritually blind and they choose not to see. But what's really awesome about this is really when the Pharisees begin to be very ticked off with Jesus.
Oh yeah, they're getting very mad with him.
Surprisingly, they're mostly mad that he is healing on the Sabbath,
which again plays into that formalism talking about.
And this traditionalism where they just they're obsessed with the literal aspect, because
that's what grants them power in the society. That they are the most invested in the legislation of God. They understand the law more so than they do the essence,
and they refer to it as the law more often than the word. And it's even like with pork, like Jesus says that nothing you put in your body can make you a sinner. It's only what you espouse out of your body, what you affect in the world. So then at that point, and it says, and at this point everything was made able to be eaten. Jesus said,
you still shouldn't eat pork.
Pork is just a nasty animal, and they had a reason for that.
Gross.
I mean, they don't sweat. They have heavy metals. It's whatever. But he says that he says this in a different gospel, but he says that it says to the Pharisees when they get mad at him for healing the blind man on the Sabbath, he says, if you have a herd of swine and one of them falls into a well on the Sabbath, are you going to leave it? And this is him talking about basically like, if you're a shepherd, God is our shepherd, you know, he's our Lord. Are you not going? He's going to save you on the Sabbath. Like the idea of relaxing on the Sabbath is not this hard fast law where you can do nothing. It's just a day of remembrance, and you're losing. Yeah. They lost the ideas behind why they were doing these things.
A day of appreciation as well, where
exactly.
It's like you've worked for these 6 days. Now enjoy the fruits of your work
and think on God and reflect on God, reflect on your life. And I think that was the idea behind the Sabbath. And like I see, and this it further justifies the need for Jesus at this time because they had been so entrenched in these traditions. And I think that a lot of these traditions, they're symbolic. Like in the Orthodox Church, there's all these things we do that are supposed to remind you and keep you present. Yeah. But it's not. But if you start doing them without actually thinking about what you're doing and the reasons behind it, you've lost it.
Yes, you're just going through the motions of doing something.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why I think that this is it's a beautiful part. I could read this one over and over again. It's the beginning of the end for Jesus, but it's really the beginning, and I think they happen just almost right after each other. I believe the man he healed was a Samaritan man as well, was he? I don't know if it says.
I don't think it says.
But either way, it's a very beautiful section. I think John is probably my favorite gospel. I like them all. John gets really deep into things. We'll touch later on more of the trial of Jesus. That's something I'd like to get into eventually.
That's the latter half of John. I think we've covered most of the important. I mean, it's all obviously important, but I think we've covered the girth of the first 10 chapters, as absent the sending out of the moneylenders from the temple, and the destroy this temple and I will raise it again in 3 days is another, allusion to later events.
Again, taken very literally by the Pharisees. They think he's literally going to destroy the temple, and they don't understand. Yeah. And I think he does this on purpose, because these things, he wants you to think on them. He doesn't want to just tell you. Yeah. You can't just tell people about God. You have to give them things to think about.
That was the mistake of Moses. Was
the
just the law, and it didn't work. You have the building of the sacred calf. You have the distrust of Moses whilst wandering through the wilderness. Whereas Christ, his followers stay with him. His followers, they're adamant. I mean, up until his crucifixion, up until the day of his crucifixion, all of them, and then after his death, even retain their faith.
And they all run off, and they end up being killed and persecuted. But they even Paul, who was never even really met Jesus. Jesus appeared to him in the desert, which we don't know the actual details of that event, obviously. But I mean, these people, they stayed with him, and they stayed true, and they kept asking God. Like even Paul says, I am not right about everything. I'm just doing. I feel the Holy Spirit through me, and I'm acting through the Holy Spirit. I'm not just giving you laws. Yeah. And he talks to them, and a lot of the apostles, they're not stating law. They're just talking philosophically with these people and trying to introduce them to God, because they say it's not me that you should listen to. I'm just telling you that you should listen to God. I'm giving you my account of why I listen to God.
Again, another contrast with the Pharisees and kind of the Jewish aristocracy of the time is they claim to be the holders of divine truth themselves. You should listen to me. Yes. Because I am in contact with the divine. Yes. Rather than not even the divine. I am in contact with the law of the divine as given by Moses, rather than here's why you should look to God.
Exactly.
And that goes into the Protestant tradition of being critical of the institutionalization of religion. I feel like that's where this comes from. I feel like for a majority of Protestants, they view the Catholic Church, they view these hierarchical religious institutions as repeating the mistakes of the Pharisees.
If we look to the Pope. The Pope is seen as literally his word is the word of God.
Yes.
And
same with the saints of Orthodoxy.
Exactly. And we have these patriarchs and archbishops in the Orthodoxy, and they're very holy men. Yeah. But even Paul and Peter weren't saying that they were speaking the word of God.
Yeah.
They never once did.
People who had more right than anyone in modern times to say that,
They quote Jesus.
Yeah.
But they're not speaking. Even Moses was not like saying like, I am the ultimate power. He's saying, this is what God told me to do, and I'm going to do it.
I love Moses.
Moses was awesome. I mean, there's a reason Exodus is so long.
The most frustrated man in human history.
But I think that's a good summation. Do you have any final points on the first 10 chapters of John?
No, I think we're gonna get more into it on the next episode.
It gets very deep. There's a lot of red lighting coming up, or red writing.
See, I feel like I'm missing out because mine does not have the red lighting. So.
It's fun. It's hard to read when it's bright outside. All right.